What's going on, guys? My name is Wade with TechDaily, and in this video, we are doing a full comparison between the three different Samsung Galaxy A03 devices: the A03 Core, the regular A03, and the A03s. That's a lot of threes. The reason I wanted to do this comparison is because I want to help outline the major differences between these three somewhat confusing devices. The specs, the features, the performance. It's not as straightforward as you might think. And based on your smartphone needs, budget, and some other factors, I'm hoping this will alleviate some of that decision fatigue and in the end allow you to make the best possible decision. And also because Samsung's own comparison charts on their website tend to be incredibly unhelpful. We've definitely got a lot to go over here, so I won't waste any more time. Let's just go ahead and get right into it. First things first, I want to talk about pricing and availability. Now, not every A03 phone will be sold in every region around the world or offered by every carrier or network. For example, the A03 Core and regular A03 are more widely available in Europe and Asia. The A03s is big with US carriers and prepaid brands, but you could theoretically buy any one of these smartphones as a GSM International Unlocked device and use it on a good number of GSM carriers around the world. Now, I'm sure you could have guessed that the A03 Core is generally going to be the cheapest of the bunch. It's about a $100 device, no matter where you buy it from. Jumping up to the regular A03, this is about a $150 smartphone, so a pretty substantial increase in comparison. And similarly, the A03s is also about a $150 phone. Of course, if you're buying it from a carrier or a prepaid network, they might offer you a deal, and prices tend to fluctuate all the time by 10 or 20 bucks. But if you're interested in doing some comparison shopping of your own, I'll leave some links down below in the video description to where you can get all three of these phones at their cheapest current prices. Physically, at least from the front, I think you can tell that all three of these phones look pretty much the same. They're actually all 6.5-inch devices. That's their screen size corner to corner. They all have the same style notch up top for the selfie camera, same size side bezels along the edge, and identical bottom chins. Stacking them all on top of one another, you can see that they're pretty much the same dimensions all around. In the hand, there's no advantage or disadvantage anywhere you look, and in fact, the height, width, thickness, and weight of each device is pretty much the same. You can barely tell which of the A03s you're holding, honestly, so screen size and overall design and form factor should not really be a decision maker. Around back, while the form factor and build kind of differ slightly, these phones all have very similar plastic housings and light textured finishes. The A03 Core gets more of a rough speckled finish, crisscross pattern near the flush single camera lens, and a combination flat profile with the sides and edges paired with a slight sloping curved back. The regular A03 offers a crisscross textured pattern, ever so slight camera bump for the dual lens setup, and more curvy sloping edges that closely mimic the A03s. This phone has a plastic build with sort of a lined texture, a similar subtle camera bump, and curvier sides and edges. Like I said, if we're being particular about the build, the A03 and A03s are much more closer to one another than the A03 Core, but generally speaking, they're about the same, all plastic build and familiar design in the end. Taking a look around, all three phones have the same dual SIM and SD card tray on the left side, and given the 32 and 64 gig configuration options, that's a must-have for these phones. On the right, similar volume and power buttons, though you'll notice on the A03s, its power button doubles as the fingerprint sensor. Neither the A03 Core nor the regular A03 have a fingerprint sensor, and in fact, the A03 Core doesn't even offer face unlock. So if biometric unlocking options are important to you, the regular A03 will at least give you face unlock, and the A03s has face and fingerprint unlocking. Down at the bottom, all three phones have the same downward firing speaker setup, mic holes, and headphone jacks, but the craziest thing here is the fact that the A03 Core and regular A03 both have micro USB ports for charging. And that to me is one of the biggest red flags with both of those phones. The A03s has a USB-C port. Around back, one camera lens on the Core, two lenses on the regular A03, and three lenses on the A03s. And I'll show you some picture samples in just a bit. Jumping back to the screens for a moment, I already mentioned that the 6.5-inch notched and double-chinned displays of these three phones were essentially the same size and design, but you should also know that spec-wise, they're also nearly identical here as well. They are each 1600 by 720 resolution PLS LCD panels, 20:9 aspect ratio, 270 pixels per inch, and about an 82% screen-to-body ratio. For the most part, the viewing experience you get is going to be about the same in the end across all three phones. Now, I'm not entirely sure what it is, but the A03 Core and regular A03 do look identical. The color, the brightness, to me, they are the same displays. The A03s, for whatever reason, does tend to look maybe a little brighter and a little more colorful, maybe more punchy and saturated. But again, I don't necessarily think that should be a major deciding factor. And like I said, the specs are the same anyway. They're all 60 Hz displays as well, which nowadays does kind of feel slower than normal with the taps and touches. All in all, absolutely budget screen setups from start to finish. And my biggest complaint here really is with the resolution. You get big screens, which is great, but at 720p, you're gonna see those pixels. There's not a whole lot you can do though, besides just jumping up to an entirely different tier of phone completely in the A series. But if you're set on specifically an A03 device and you want to save some money, any one of these is going to offer you basically the same viewing experience in every capacity. You get no advantage one way or another. The out loud listening experience, to me at least, also seems to be the same. Single speaker setups on all three phones, it's down at the bottom, and I think they're the same actual speakers in each device. I can't tell a difference, but here's a sound sample from each so you can decide for yourself. When it comes to the internal specs and performance of these devices, this is actually the area that surprised me the most when I compared them side by side, in more ways than one. The A03 Core is powered by a TSMC SC98638 processor, very much a budget entry-level chipset that actually came out way back in 2018. You also get 2 gigs of RAM on the core and 32 gigs of storage, with no other configuration options to choose from. The regular A03 gets a TSMC T606 processor, which is just another entry-level chipset, but fairly new actually. It came out in September of last year. And you have the option here of 3 or 4 gigs of RAM and 32, 64, or 128 gigs of internal storage. So lots of options to spec this phone out if you want. The A03s should technically be the most powerful phone of the bunch, I guess, if we're going off the name scheme alone, but it gets a MediaTek Helio P35 processor, 2, 3, or 4 gigs of RAM, and just 32 or 64 gigs of storage, which is weird. Usually S phones in Samsung's A series are better or newer, refreshed versions of their namesake. But if we're going off the Geekbench scores, that's actually not the case at all. The regular A03 in the middle there puts up noticeably better numbers. And in my side-by-side speed tests, the A03 tends to outperform the A03s in more ways than one. Now, there's another thing you have to consider here, the software. The A03 Core is an Android Go device, kind of a lighter version of Android, with fewer apps, less options and settings to choose from. It's more optimized for a lower spec budget device like this, but it's even more limited than Samsung's One UI Core that the other A03 phones run on. Also, no Android 12 update for any one of these devices right now. Like I said, side by side, surprisingly, the regular A03 does tend to launch and load the more complicated stuff faster than the other devices. This is not really what I had expected at all, and weirdly enough, the A03 Core gets a faster feel with Android Go. Some of the default apps load up almost instantly, but keep in mind you get a very much watered down version of a ton of the elements of Android in One UI, so that's part of the reason. Overall, this to me is what makes the A03 lineup so confusing. It's very much obvious that the A03 Core is the lowest spec, lowest tiered, least software optioned phone, but between the regular A03 and A03s, it's just confusing. The internal specs and performance don't line up with maybe what the average consumer might expect, and I don't even understand why there needs to be 2 additional different phones here. With the batteries, at least size-wise, this is relatively straightforward. They all have 5,000 milliamp capacities inside. The differences, though, lie with charging, like I mentioned earlier, and the potential optimization and longevity. The A03 Core and regular A03 charge via a micro USB port, and to me in 2022, this just doesn't make a whole lot of sense. You're going to get slower charging speeds, a connector that isn't really supported. I figured no Android device would have this nowadays, but here we are with 2 of them. Let me know if I'm missing something here. Maybe other parts of the world are just okay with this charging standard still. The A03s has a USB-C port and 15-watt max charging speeds, which is fair for a budget phone, I suppose. None of these devices support wireless charging, and as far as their battery life, this is really going to depend on your individual usage. But I found that each one of these is going to be about a 2-day device under some normal usage. I think the A03 Core with Android Go and limited light apps is probably going to be the most battery conscious device. The A03 and A03s to me yielded about the same screen on time day after day, but it's really going to depend on how you use these phones. I don't personally see a huge advantage any which way. Finally, when it comes to the camera setups, this is another area that really separates these 3 phones, but again, not necessarily in the way you'd expect. The A03 Core is pretty simple. You get just one single 8 megapixel lens around back and a 5 megapixel selfie camera up front. The regular A03's dual lens setup offers a 48 megapixel main lens and 2 megapixel depth sensor, along with seemingly the same 5 megapixel selfie camera up front as well. The A03s gets the triple lens setup, but its main shooter is just a 13 megapixel lens. It has a 2 megapixel macro for up close pictures and the same 2 megapixel depth sensor. And it also has the 5 megapixel selfie camera up front. Inside the camera apps, the A03 Core basically gives you a picture option, a video option, and panorama option. That's it. Super simple, and not a whole lot of other shooting modes or settings to even choose from. The regular A03 delivers quite a bit more. Portrait pics, pro controls, night mode, which is very valuable, hyperlapse, a 48 megapixel picture mode, and a few additional modes and settings that allow for a more robust array of camera capabilities. The A03s has all those same capabilities, except for the 48 megapixel mode, and all 3 phones are capped at 1080p 30 FPS video. All in all, if pictures or videos are at all important to you, there is a ton of value here, jumping up to the A03 or A03s versus the Core. With some real-world picture samples, you can actually see some pretty significant differences. Starting with the selfie lens, the A03 Core does look surprisingly solid with its color, not as much with the detail or clarity, but at a glance, I think it's actually the most natural and realistic shot. The regular A03 isn't bad, but the A03s is weirdly saturated. I look super orange, though there is plenty of detail at least. The A03 Core doesn't offer a selfie portrait option, or any portrait pics actually, but between the regular A03 and A03s, the results are about the same as before. Very oversaturated on the A03s, I'd say, and a little more neutral on the regular A03. With the rear lens setup, it's sort of flip-flops. The A03 Core and regular A03 look more colorful and saturated now, though maybe more balanced at least. And the A03s gives you a bright, pale, and maybe a bit overexposed look. You can of course alter the color and contrast in your favorite photo editing app. The big thing is detail. The A03 Core is going to give you quite the fuzzy image in the end. Well, the other 2 phones can capture a lot more in every shot, and when you throw in all the capabilities and shooting modes, that really makes the difference. The A03 Core is great if you just need to take any random picture and don't care about the result, but if you want to take decent pictures with some shooting modes thrown in, the A03 and A03s are both what you'd need. Now, when I set out to do this comparison, I figured that the A03s would be the best of the 3 different A03 devices. Usually, an S phone from Samsung in their A series lineup denotes a newer, refreshed, mid-cycle release. But objectively, spec-wise, the regular A03 is better than the A03s in almost every way, except for that micro USB port, which I still don't understand. The only advantage in going with the A03s aside from the USB-C port seems to be the fingerprint sensor. The A03 Core is no doubt the most budget of the budget lineup, and if you have to get a phone for $100 or less, it's not bad. You just get so much more phone for $50 more with the regular A03 or A03s. In the end, I think Samsung just makes these phones for different parts of the world, different regions that support different charging standards and have different needs, but it doesn't negate the fact that Samsung's smartphone lineup has become very, very confusing. And I hope this video helped clear some of that confusion up. Honestly though, it might have only added to it. But what do you guys think? Which A03 phone makes the most sense to you? Which would you prefer? Let me know in the comments down below. I'd love to know your thoughts, of course. Hopefully you guys did enjoy this video though. Be sure to follow TechDaily on Twitter and subscribe to the TechDaily YouTube channel if you haven't already. And I'll see you guys later.